Welcome to the Introduction to CAD and CAE. In Assemblies Part 1, you assemble a pick-and-place robot. After completing this lesson, you will be able to insert robot components into an existing design, add joints to position the robot components relative to one another, animate the joints to review the relative motion, add motion links to the robot clamps to check their functionality. I've started by creating a new assembly called Robot Assembly-A. I'm going to insert into that design using Insert into Current Design, and I'm selecting Robot Base Model A. I'm going to rotate that around, and then click on OK. Now if I click and drag on that component, you'll see it can move around. So let's undo that, go to the browser, right-click, and ground that component. In the browser, you see that small symbol indicating that it's ground, and that other symbol indicates that it's an inserted component. The next component is going to be Robot Axis 1-2. So insert that into the current design, and the workflow is very similar. I'm going to move and rotate the part into position. So once the part's in position, I can click OK. I'm now going to add the assembly joint. As I go to Joint, it's going to be a rigid joint, so this part does not move. Select the center of the circle, then go to the other component, and select the edge. You now get an animation showing that the rigid joint is correct. We can review those values. In this case, they're all going to be 0, so click OK. The next component to be inserted is Robot Axis 2-3. So again, move and rotate that part until it's in the correct position. So once it's in position, click on OK. Back to Joint. It's going to be a revolute joint because I know the functionality of this part that it's going to rotate. Select the center of that circle. Rotate the assembly around and select that center point. And now we see our animation showing the revolution. Now it's going through the assembly. We'll correct that later on. Click OK. You can now rotate that part into approximate location as to where you want that arm to be. Next part we're going to insert is Robot Axis 3-4. Move and rotate that into position. And once it's in position, you can click OK. We want to go to Assembly Joint, Capture Position, and that capture position is added to the design history. Select the center point, rotate around, select the other center point, now in this case we do want to have an angle, so I'm going to rotate that around until it's approximately the angle I want. It's going to be 20 degrees, so 110, and then click OK. Now you can see that the joints are actually displayed. These are all the joints that I've placed so far. You can click on them to highlight them, and you can animate the joint. All the other components are basically hidden, other than the two components that are taking part in that joint. That visibility is controlled, and you can turn it on and off as you wish. For this particular lesson, we'll leave it turned on. The next component is going to be robot axis 4-5. We can move and rotate that around. And click on OK. And then apply the joint. Rigid is good. So select the first position. And that's going to be the center of the circle. Be careful with this one. There's a very small area there, so be careful with that. And then select the second center. It's going to be a rigid joint, so click OK. The next part to insert is robot axis 5. Again, move and rotate that into position. And click OK. Add the required joint. In this case, it's going to be a revolute joint. Select the center, and then select the second center. We see our animation, so you can click OK. The next component to assemble is Robot Axis 5 Adapter. Move into position. I'm going to zoom in on this one. You see there's a small hole there, and that's going to meet up with a pin on the next part. So that hole has to be facing outwards. Apply the joint. Change from revolute to rigid. Select that edge, and then select the circular edge on the other part. And click OK. The next component is Robot Clamp Mount. So insert that into the design. This is the part with a small pin that I referenced earlier on. I want to make sure those are facing the correct way. Click OK. And now we can apply the joint. Zoom in. I'm selecting the base of that pin. And then going to the other component. And we'll zoom in on that hole. And selecting the outer face. Click OK. And back to the home view. Two more components left, both called Robot Clamp. So we'll insert the first one. And these are the clamps that actually pick and place the parts that this robot will pick up. So we'll approximately rotate that into position. Let's just bring it back to 90. There it is. And click OK. Now checking the functionality, this has to slide in that groove that you see, that slot. So we're going to be applying a slider joint. Let's move it a little closer. Go to Joint, Capture Position, change to Slider, and let's see what's required for this type of joint. So take the center point on that face, and then go to the center point on the face that it's going to be sliding on. And that's that point right there. Now we see the animation. That's not what we want. So let's change it from the Z-axis to the X-axis. And that's correct. But we don't want it to move in that location. So we do have to make a change. So drag it to the right. And it looks like that value is going to be -20. So enter -20 and click OK. We're going to repeat that for the second clamp. So insert that into the current design. Drag it into position. And just rotate it a little bit. Then click OK. Just as we did before, apply a slider joint, center point on that face, and the center point on the other face. Now I can't quite see that, so rotate it around. There it is. And we have to change the values here as well. Drag it to the left. And we'll see that offset in the X direction is going to be 20 millimeters. And click OK. So now the two clamps are in position. I'm going to hide the data panel. All the components are now in the file. I've noticed that I actually made a mistake here. This one was a rigid joint. So I'm going to click on it and go Edit Join and change it to Revolute. Then click OK. I want to see if that's actually working. But because of some of the other joints in it, it's not really obvious. So if you right-click on that joint, that Revolute joint, and then Animate, you'll see that it is rotating correctly. So the functionality is good. With the two clamps, I want to check how they're moving. So right-click on that one, Animate Joint. Well, it's certainly moving in the correct direction, but it's way too far to the left and the right. So what I need to do is edit that joint, and I'm changing the joint limits. I have a number of values I can key in. For minimum, we'll leave that at 0. For maximum, we're going to change that value to 10. For the rest position, we'll leave that at 0. Let's animate that and see what happens. So that's exactly what we want. Click OK. I'm repeating that edit joint for the other clamp. Minimum 0. This time the maximum is going to be -10. And the rest position, change that back to 0. Animate it. Again, that confirms that it's correct. Click OK. Next thing I want to do is create something called a motion link. Capture the position. That allows us to link a couple of joints together. That's going to be slider 8 and 9 in my browser. And animate those two. Now when I try to click on animate, nothing happens. That's because I have to check reverse. Now click on animate, and you see that those two clamps are working perfectly. So by putting in joint limits and then a motion link, you can check the functionality of your assembly. Click on OK, and that completes the assembly.